In the slums of the capital, Lilika Vans was quite famous. It was because all the parents were scolding their children saying, "Try to be half as disciplined as Lilika." Lilika, who turned 8 this year, was known to be very diligent. And if there was one burden in Lilika's life, it would be her mother. Several times she helped her mother, who was drunk and tottering, to get back into the house. The neighbors could hear the sound of the bottles breaking and the little girl's cries since the thin wooden planks did not block any sound. On days when these violent intonations were heard in their house, Lilika went to work with red, swollen eyes. Still, Lilika was proud of her mother. Because she had never seen a person as beautiful as her. Plus, she was the only one who knew how to read in these dilapidated places. Lilika always thought it was only because her mother, who was originally an aristocrat, was suffering terribly. Rumor has it that her mother was kicked out of her house because Lilika's father, who had gone to sea to trade, was heavily in debt and never returned. If it weren't for Lilika, her mother could have gone anywhere to remarry, and the little girl would have let it happen willingly. Hair as gold as if she had copied the purity of the sun and eyes bluer than cornflowers, Lydia was so beautiful the light couldn't even fade in their slum. With her milky white skin and delicate appearance, she looked like a fairy no matter where she was or what she was wearing. People could tell men wanted to get closer to her, but none of them had approached her yet, perhaps because her mother seemed unreachable. Lilika thought she was lucky. Even when her mother ran behind her with a broomstick, even when she was beaten by the owner of the house to the point where she would almost pass out. Even though she was now 8 years old, her body was so small and slender, that it would be blown up and knocked to the ground if a man struck her with one hand. She had been hit like this before because of the late rent and she had had a hard time coming to her senses. Her head had turned, her ears had buzzed, and her mouth had tingled with blood. Her eyes had darkened and she could see twinkling stars. So Lilika was worried. She worried about what would happen if bad people approached her pretty mother. Every night she held her hands and prayed to the brightest star. "Don't let bad people near her. Please always keep my mother safe." Fortunately, the star granted her wish since her mother used to hang around the bar tirelessly without any problem. Today was a calm day. Because her mother had drunk too much and had fallen asleep, Lilika tied her dark hair tightly and got to work. Slum children couldn't do much. Still, Lilika worked diligently. She had a reputation for being meticulous and not damaging or stealing food. Lilika has always applied the work as credit mindset after learning it from the shoe shiner. Today was the day dedicated to cleaning the kitchen of the tavern. Repeat the process of removing oil stains from the floor by rubbing them with sand and a brush, then rinsing them with water. Her arms were shaking and sweat was running down, but Lilika was scrubbing the floor vigorously with both hands. She liked to do something as simple as that since she could drift off to her dreams and thoughts. And the brush, she washed it with water. Finally, Lilika received a big fairy tale. 5 little fairy tales equal 1 big fairy tale, and 1 big fairy tale can buy a loaf of bread. If she collects 10 of these big fairy tales, she will get a nickel coin. Lilika dreamed of having lots of gold and silver coins, but these were very, very rare. Lilika bought half a loaf of bread and went home. When she entered the house, she saw that her mother was still sleeping. Awesome! Lilika gently lifted the blanket and the floorboards below. Inside was Lilika's secret hideout. A bag was full of coins and little fairy tales. After caressing and checking her coin bag several times, she put it back in her pocket. The month's rent was inside. If her mother found out, she would go out right away for a drink or do unnecessary things, so Lilika had to secretly protect the money like that. The bag was quite heavy, so it looked like there would be money left over even after paying the rent. Just thinking about it made her happy, and Lilika smiled before closing the floor and covering it with a blanket. But suddenly, her mother screamed as she writhed in bed like she was having a fit. Lilika froze immediately. And no, it burns. Not me. Even after her mother fell out of bed, she continued to struggle as if she hadn't noticed. So Lilika ran towards her. "Mother, mother, are you okay? Where does it hurt? Save me, live." Lilika gripped her mother's hand tightly and it wasn't until she shuddered one last time that she stopped. She opened her trembling eyelids and looked around, but she looked haggard. Lilika was terrified to see her in this state. She had heard of people whose minds were damaged after abusing alcohol for too long. She feared that her mother had come to this. Where am I? You, impossible, Lilika. Urgently, her mother lifted her upper body and grabbed Lilika's hand, which was helping her up. Sitting down nearby, Lilika replied, "Yes, mother, it's Lilika." Her mother looked blankly at Lilika. Lilika grew impatient and stared at her. "Mother, are you okay?" We got up from the ground and started running around the house. "Oh my God, we're in the ghetto. It's impossible. This is, oh my." She looked out the window and around the house, then she picked up a small piece of mirror, looked at herself intently, and sucked in her breath. I returned. "Mother." Lilika slowly started to get scared. It seemed to her that. Then she turned to her daughter. Lilika flinched. Her mother ran over and hovered her hand on Lilika's face. Yes, it could not be otherwise. Lilika closed her eyes immediately, but then two hands gently touched her cheeks. When she opened them slowly, she met the blue gaze of her mother, who was very close. Then, tears streamed down her face. "Lilika, you are alive. My dear Lilika. Mommy is sorry, she had it all wrong. I was so stupid. Mommy was so terribly stupid." Lilika blinked in surprise and her mother hugged her. Time and time again her mother cried, "My treasure, my precious baby, my Lilika, I love you." She whispered those dreamy words. Lilika relaxed where her mother's body heat had touched her. Lydia's words began to seep into her heart. The tears overflowed without her realizing it, and Lilika cried. She didn't know if what she was experiencing was a dream. Yes, maybe she was dreaming, but her mother was so warm. It was so nice to hold her in her arms. Lilika realized it even more afterwards. Her mother stroked her hair, wiped her wet cheeks and embraced her. After a while, and having calmed down, her mother sighed and hugged Lilika for the last time before letting go. For Lilika, everything was sudden, strange and anxious at the same time. She was also worried about what would happen if her mother changed again. "Lily, what year, month and day are it today?" "Today is April 15th of the year 485. At Lilika's words, her mother thought for a moment, then snapped her finger. "The Imperial Palace Ball." Lilika was surprised by her sudden words but nodded. The spring ball, which no one in the capital was unaware of, would soon take place. During this period, the capital is revitalized and even the slums are also infected by this dynamism. It is said that nobles dressed in splendid clothes go one after another to the capital to participate in a splendid ball held at the Imperial Palace. His Majesty the Emperor will also attend this year's ball, but rumor has it that His Majesty is a terrifying person. Parents even threaten their children like this: "If you continue to behave this way, I will send you to the Emperor." Lilika had heard stories of him ripping out a child's heart in order to eat it, or freezing to death everyone he didn't love. She didn't know if it was true or not, but it was said that high-ranking nobles had special abilities. They are said to be able to control water at will, freezing anything or moving objects. Not only that, it seems they have a lot of magical tools. It is said that His Majesty, with such powers, would have killed people to seize the throne and become the emperor. Rumors also said that His Majesty killed the former ruler. The current crown prince is the son of the former emperor. However, the current emperor has declared that the prince will inherit the throne when he comes of age, but can we really believe that? Anyway, most rumors said the emperor was weird and scary. Lilika blinked, suddenly wondering why the imperial ball was being discussed. Her mother grabbed Lilika's shoulder. "Lily, Mommy has to attend the ball." It was so absurd that Lilika couldn't even answer. Her mother's blue eyes flashed like lightning. "One way or another, I have to attend the ball and meet His Majesty. We have to take our chance now. We have to prepare today and go tomorrow." "That doesn't make sense." Lilika started to get desperate. She thought her mother had changed, but she was wrong to think so, even for a moment. She was talking about the Imperial Palace. She was talking about meeting the Emperor. Lilika was flabbergasted, everything was so absurd. Why didn't her mother know what an 8-year-old knew? How could we even enter the Imperial Palace? There is a way in. Of course, you will not wear these clothes. I need to borrow proper clothes from the pawnshop. Once that's done, Mommy will take care of the rest. So, Lily, knowing what was about to happen, Lilika spoke with trembling lips. No, I don't have the money. Mother. Lily, please, trust your mom just this once. Yes. Lilika shook her head. She had to pay the rent right away, and she definitely didn't want to be beaten again. Besides, it was for an imperial ball. What if his mother was caught by the soldiers? No, she was definitely going to get caught. Her mother was gentle and comforting, but Lilika kept her lips closed. The stubbornness of a little girl who grew up in a slum should not be taken lightly. Finally, Lydia sighed and lifted her hands from her shoulders. Okay, Lily, if it's your will, I can't do anything. Lilika lifted her head. Her mother didn't seem particularly upset. After thinking for a moment, her mother seized her again by the shoulders and said, Lily, please know one thing. Mommy will do everything she can for you. I know you are a child who can be happy even without these things. It is simply my desire, the greed of a mother who would do her best for her child. Do you understand? Lilika nodded. Her mother smiled and hugged her. Then go to bed early today. At her mother's words, Lilika quickly pulled out half of the bread purchased earlier. Eat this to get better. At the little girl's words, her mother looked at half the bread for a moment and said, Let's share. The hard bread had to be cracked with force. After sharing the bread, Lily slept in the narrow bed with her mother. She was so happy that she fell asleep without even dreaming of her silver coin. When Lilika woke up the next day, her mother was nowhere to be found. She saw the open wooden floor without the blanket over it. Of course, the coins in the bag were all gone. Confused, Lilika collapsed on the floor. Her legs were so weak that she couldn't help it. She didn't have the strength to run to catch up with her mother. She cried until her ears buzzed and she felt dizzy. She wanted to curl up as the betrayal was extremely excruciating, but she couldn't let herself go like that. Because she no longer had any money. Do not cry. Stop crying, Lilika Vans. It's not so bad. Rather, aren't you ashamed of having so many tears at 8 years old? Mentally encouraging herself, Lilika took a deep breath and stood up. Living in a slum required perseverance. Besides, she thought back to her motto, work is credit. She couldn't not go to work today even though she was sad and sick. If she didn't go capital. After wiping her hands, feet and face at the well, she left the slums. There are many expensive glasses in bars, but long, thin glasses are not easily cleaned by large adults' hands. However, the hands of a child like Lilika adapted easily, and she did the job of washing and wiping the glasses without leaving stains on them. Although it wasn't usually something that would be entrusted to a child from the ghetto, Lilika was more than welcomed after proving her sincerity. Besides, it was a job that gave 2 big fairy tales, so she couldn't miss it. If by misfortune, she accidentally broke a glass, she might not be able to pay it back even if she worked in the bar for the rest of her life. So Lilika worked diligently and very carefully. She was tired because it was a lot of work, but thanks to that, she managed to stop thinking about her mother. When the job was done, she was exhausted. She was working way too hard for her little body. The landlord handed her 2 big fairy tales, and after saying goodbye, Lilika returned home. She knew she had to go home, but she didn't want to return today. So Lilika strolled through the streets, thinking about the 2 big fairy tales she had won. But people passing through the streets saw how dirty Lilika was and they avoided her like the plague. Lilika was quickly ashamed and headed back to the slum. However, it was not until sunset that she finally returned home. Maybe her mother was back. She could apologize, or maybe she would have brought some money. Or else her father would be back. Thinking this, Lilika smiled bitterly. It was a hopeless smile. As soon as she opened the door, she felt something different. It was like a sign that only the owner of the house could feel. Nothing was missing inside, but Lilika was very nervous because it wouldn't be strange if a theft happened here. Moving slowly, her hair standing up like a kitten, Lilika looked around. Miss Lilika Vans. Lilika jumped at the voice from the darkness. She turned in the direction of the voice, A man with a hood covering his face stood there. Even though he wore a worn hood, Lilika knew he was a high-ranking person. His clothes covered by the cloak looked expensive at first glance, and more importantly, she guessed it by looking at his shoes. He had an upright posture, giving an air of perfectly mastered pride. He had to be a man who didn't have to bow his head in front of many people. "You are very late. Who are you?" Lilika spoke first when she realized he had no intention of hurting her. "I came to get you." "Yes." Lilika's eyes widened in surprise. Then, they immediately furrowed with suspicion. "Is it because of the rent? Or, no, your mother asked me to pick you up." At his unexpected words, Lilika exclaimed in amazement. "My mother? Me? Yes. What happened? Have you been discovered too? If that's not the case, you will hear the details later. I am only a messenger. It would be best to go out in the small alleys without being detected." Lilika crossed her arms at the man's response and said firmly, "I will not follow a stranger without thinking." For a moment, the man looked puzzled. After some thinking, he introduced himself. "I am Lauv Wolf." "So what?" Lilika looked at him with those words clearly written on her face. The man took on a serious tone. "In fact, Miss Van's mother is in critical condition." "What?" "There was an accident and she told me to come to get you. She asks for you fervently." "I see." Lilika didn't know what to do. Did her mother really have an accident? Oh my god. Had she been hurt trying to break into the imperial palace? When she remembered the crying and screaming last night, her heart raced. Let's go. Quick, let's hurry. Follow me." Lauv hastily opened the back wall plank. The wall panel, which was intact before, was missing, but Lilika didn't even notice. Lauv quickly dragged her into the dark alley. They emerged into a smaller alley and the man whistled. A cart that had been hiding until now stopped in front of him. Oh my god. Lilika had never seen such a large carriage so close. Plus, it was the first time she would go inside a carriage at all. Lauv opened the door and helped Lilika into the carriage. The wheels were so big that she couldn't get into the vehicle without help. Lauv looked at Lilika. Then, he advised the amazed little girl. "Miss Vans, you shouldn't trust people so easily." Confused, Lilika was about to say something, but the carriage door closed. When the carriage stopped, Lilika was stuck in a corner of the carriage like a crippled cat. She thought she trusted her senses too much. Maybe it was because she had been exposed to many dangers, but now Lilika instinctively knew who meant her harm. She didn't know how many times she had avoided dangerous things thanks to them. It was a gift that even the shoeshiner recognized in her. However, she had ceased to be vigilant because her senses had not indicated any danger to her. She grabbed the handle and pulled it towards her, her eyes expressing that she wouldn't set foot outside. Lauv, who was about to open the door, thought for a moment about what he should do. If he forced the handle of the carriage, it would be scratched, but he didn't care. That would be the best case scenario. What worried him was the risk that the little girl would be injured. "Miss Vans. Go away. Go." Lilika cried out desperately and glared at him, but Lauv felt no threat. It was no big deal if she got scratched in the process of opening the door. However, she looked so fragile, that he was afraid the slightest shock would break her bones. "Is it true that my mother was injured?" His thought cut off, Lauv answered the child's hesitant and worried question. "No, your mother is in good health." From inside the carriage, the swear words of the slum dwellers were shouted, insults no noble girl had ever heard. Finally, Lauv decided to cross his arms and wait for the girl to calm down. Lilika thought that if he tried anything, she would hit him as hard as she could. But as time passed calmly, she gradually relaxed. The scenery outside the carriage door captivated her. She saw a beautiful garden and a building even more splendid than all the wonders that had graced her eyes. Even the water fountain made happy noises. The surroundings were not noisy and did not look like a human trafficking site. Looking carefully around her, Lilika leaned a little more towards the door. Once she got close enough, she saw Lauv. He had moved away and was now out of reach. Her head sticking out of the door, Lilika looked around. If you looked this way, it was a garden. If you looked over there, it was still a garden. However, the manicured lawns and trees still looked suspicious to her. Where are we? Lilika asked a question and Lauv gave a simple answer. It's a separate palace. A separate palace. It is one of the smaller palaces attached to the imperial palace. Are you ready to go down now? With that, Lilika gripped the carriage door tightly. Lauv stared at her intently. Lilika slowly began to take refuge in the back of the carriage. Lauv sighed softly, feeling like he had missed the opportunity to catch the kitten who was halfway out of its hiding. Suddenly, a woman ran out of the palace. Lilika. Is Lilika there? Ah, mother. Her voice was that of a familiar mother, but her outfit was way too dazzling. Lilika had to check several times if the person in front of her was her mother. The little girl jumped out of the carriage when she found Lydia running towards her, one hand holding the hem of her loose dress. Mother. Lilika. Thank God. I'm sorry, were you worried? Ah, mommy is sorry. It's all her fault. Her mother's clothes were soft and the folds made a nice crisp sound. Lydia's arms were comforting and her cheeks brushing against her seemed very soft. Involuntarily, Lilika said, I'm really angry. She wanted to express her frustration. Contrary to her expectations, her mother neither got angry nor pushed her away. Rather than that, she hugged her even tighter. I know, mommy was wrong. She did something really wrong. But she had no other idea. Forgive her, okay. Lilika's heart softened as her mother apologized again and again with a shaky voice. I know, but how did all this happen? Where are we? What is going on? Yes, let's come in and I'll tell you everything. Her mother smiled, stood up, and then took her hand. Finally, she looked at Lauv. Thank you. My pleasure, Lady Lydia. Lauv greeted her politely. Lilika hesitated and waved her hand, and Lauv bowed his head slightly as well. This surprised Lilika and she clung to her mother. It was the first time she had seen a grown man bow to her. She held her breath and looked around her. Lydia decided that her daughter should be washed first. Her brown hair was greasy and bushy, and her fingernails and ears were black. There were no servants in the palace, but there was no particular difficulty because hot water was abundant. Lilika exclaimed, Is that a bathtub? She was very surprised, so amazed that this place was filled with hot water. Her astonishment did not stop there when she saw the clear water turning black, or when she noticed that the soap, which smelled good, tasted bitter and irritated her eyes. It was just amazing. Lilika thought a piece of her skin had come off as she was washed from her hair to the tips of her fingernails with a brush. A warm, sweet scent was applied and Lilika put on her new clothes. She wore incredibly soft and thick underwear, as well as a dress full of lace. It was the first time she wore such a gorgeous, yet dense outfit, so it felt a bit suffocating. Underneath, wearing silk socks and soft lambskin boots, Lilika wondered if she was dreaming. Several times she stroked her clothes and enjoyed the pleasant texture. A little later her mother came in with some light food. For the first time, she tasted jam. It sparkled like jewels on soft bread that seemed to melt. Then her mother explained, It's raspberry jam. Lilika cleared her throat. She was slightly thirsty so her mother gave her an orange drink that tasted amazing. Lydia told her it was called orange juice. She didn't know what an orange was, but Lilika thinks the world is really big and there are a lot of delicious things out there. And the scary, the little one questioned. How did it go? Well, your mother is going to marry His Majesty the Emperor the day after tomorrow. Lilika was so stunned that she didn't even realize the bread had fallen to the floor. Also, surprisingly, she hadn't heard a sound when her soft bread slipped from her hands. Lilika stared at her mother. Her lovely mother had always been Lilika's pride. Her wavy golden hair and blue eyes seemed to glow in the dark. Today, her mother was even more beautiful. So much so that she couldn't even recognize her directly. Compared to her mother, she had unremarkable, dull brown hair. It would be so nice if her hair could wave like clouds. However, her turquoise eyes, which were similar to her mother's, were her pride. And no, Lilika, don't run away from reality. Lilika shook her head and picked up the bread that had fallen on the floor. However, her mother took what she was going to put inside her mouth as it was dirty. She then thought that this room was 1,000 times cleaner than her bedroom. Watching the precious bread being taken from her hands, Lilika was startled but quickly regained her composure. Because this story made more sense than a mother falling in love with the emperor and marrying him the following days. Lilika then asked with a serious face. So that means you have a job? Lydia brushed the crumbs from her daughter's lips and nodded. She did have a job. It was hard to just admit it, but there was no reason not to say anything at all either. Whatever the conditions, whatever the method, a transaction was a transaction, and a contract was a contract. Okay. Lilika was relieved by her mother's words. It was easier to accept that it was a job or a contract. Who was Lilika Vans? Wasn't she the #1 worker in the slums with a work as a credit mindset? Lilika snapped out of her initial embarrassment and picked up another piece of bread. But her mother was going to marry His Majesty the Emperor. So, wouldn't she become the Empress? Her smiling mother was extremely beautiful. She could very well play the wife's role of such a man. Mother. Lilika made her decision as her cheeks puffed up from the bread shoved into her mouth. Then, she swallowed the food with the orange juice. She figured she was going to have to help her mother with her work. What about me? When Lilika asked, Lydia had a rather sulky face. I thought my Lily would be more surprised than that. I was amply surprised. It has been decided that you will be taken as the Emperor's adopted daughter. So, from the day after tomorrow, Lilika will be a princess. A princess. Regarding her future work, her mind went completely blank for a second. However, the little girl quickly regained her senses. The day after tomorrow, Lilika will be a contracted princess. A daughter under contract. Either way, it was going to be quite a lot of work. Lilika thought, slightly embarrassed by herself as she recognized the difficulty of the task ahead of her. But what the hell did a princess even have to do? Still puzzled, Lilika asked about the contract. She looked around her and asked in a low voice. If it's a contract, how long will it last? Her mother replied, until the crown prince becomes an adult as well as the new emperor. So, it will be about 8 years. 8 years. It's a very, very long time. She was already 8 years old and she couldn't understand so many things. Her mother continued. When the contract is over, let's both buy a house on the outskirts of the capital and live happily together. We will also have a small garden. What do you think? Really, a small house with a little garden meant more to her than an imperial palace or being a princess. Yes, you would play in the garden comfortably and go build your own life afterwards. The money I'll earn will be huge after all. But be careful, Lydia said seriously. Never tell a soul. This is strictly secret. This contract must never be revealed. Yes, I will never reveal this secret. Even if I die. For a moment, her mother's lips quivered. Lydia hugged Lilika. I know, Lily, I know you will keep it secret. Her voice was shaking slightly and Lilika patted her mother's back to let her know that everything was fine. She must have been afraid to do something so daunting. Lilika took a deep breath in a confident voice. Don't worry, Mother. I will work hard to help you. At that, her mother smiled slightly and stood up. To begin, I will help you with the first thing you have to do. Which is your contractual wedding, which will take place the day after tomorrow. Her mother chuckled. After that, 2 days passed without a hitch. Lilika tried to adapt to the situation, but it was a difficult task since everything happened so quickly. Of course, it wasn't just Lilika. The imperial family, except the emperor, no, not only the imperial family, but the entire empire was in shock. People were, in addition to the sudden news of the emperor's marriage, surprised by the fact that he had a lover to begin with, and that she was a woman with a child. It became the trending topic of conversation. I'm going to get married the next day. The emperor only had to say a word, but his subordinates had much more to say than him. Fortunately, it was during the spring ball, so the nobles were already gathered in the capital, otherwise, the ceremony would have taken place in an empty temple. The hastily prepared wedding dress was also ready for use. Seeing the pure white dress, the bride said, gather the whole hem of the dress and puff up the buttocks. Time was running out, so no one bothered to contradict her. So, the maids desperately mended and altered the dress according to Lydia's instructions. It looked like current fashion trends were moving towards another style, but Lilika hadn't realized it at the time. The emperor's wedding usually followed a series of steps for at least a year. However, it was currently taking place in just 2 days. In fact, everything was a melting pot of confusion. The ceremony was over before rumors about Lydia could even spread. The day after the wedding, there was another small ceremony to make Lilika the emperor's adopted daughter, and it went like clockwork. That day, Lilika had met her mother. However, the little girl was worried because her mother looked exhausted as if she had not slept all night. From that day on, Lilika was no longer a Vans. She took the name, Lilika Narrator. Thus, there are only 3 people that Princess Lilika will have to bow to: His Majesty the Emperor, Her Majesty the Empress and His Highness the Crown Prince. Lilika listened to her lesson seriously. Her thin face wasn't as chubby as it should be for her age, but her large eyes sparkled with interest. Mrs. Glendoran, Lilika's new teacher, looked at the little girl with fresh eyes. When she had first been asked to teach Lilika, she had hesitated. Indeed, knowing that the girl came from the slums, she wondered if she should teach such a child. But the right to be able to have access to the Sun Palace won her heart. The nobility of the empire is divided into 2 categories: those who have access to the Sun Palace and those who do not. As for the Sky Palace, any noble could enter and exit it, but the Sun Palace, where the emperor resided, was different. It was one of the rights granted by the emperor, and most high-ranking nobles had it. Of course, if the emperor did not like a person, their right could be taken away from them. Thus, nobles who had access to the court of the Sun Palace were called aristocrats, half jokingly and half seriously, and not simply nobles. It was an opportunity that would never come again for Mrs. Glendoran, a noblewoman who had no access to this court. So, the lady had sworn to tolerate all the children she taught in the hope of having this right, but the little girl she had met was completely different from the one she had imagined. She wasn't distracted or fidgety, she wasn't running around and saying vulgar words. Rather than spoiled aristocratic children, her attitude was much more pleasant. There was no better partner for a teacher than someone trying to learn. As Glendoran used to come to the palace in the afternoon, she could only see her mother in the morning. However, when she went to see her mother in the morning, the servants often told her that she was sleeping because she was tired. Annoyance was evident in the demeanor of the maid talking to her, but Lilika persisted because of her growing concern. What in the world happened last night? Mother continues to sleep because she is tired. After several visits, Lilika was finally able to meet her mother. Lydia, who welcomed her in a dressing gown on her bed, looked exhausted. "Mother, are you okay?" When Lilika asked that, Lydia, a little surprised, nodded. "I'm fine, but you seem so weak. Do you sleep well at night?" "At night," Lydia mumbled. Then she added, gritting her teeth, "I can't sleep well. It's important to get a good night's sleep." Lydia laughed at her daughter's worried remarks and said, "Don't worry, everything is fine." She answered her daughter's other questions and asked some as well. They were trivial questions to find out if life at the palace was going well. Then Lilika left early because she didn't want to keep bothering her exhausted mother. But actually, Lilika wanted to stay longer because she was still full of energy, not having had her etiquette lesson yet. Besides, Lilika was a little worried that the maids weren't taking good care of her mother. The little girl sighed deeply and asked, "Why is my mother so exhausted?" At that, the maid who had opened the door for Lilika chuckled. "It's because His Majesty torments her every night." There was definitely some sarcasm in her voice, but it still came as a shock to Lilika. "His Majesty." Dumbfounded, Lilika turned to the maid, and the woman confirmed. "Yes, that's right," with a frank smile. "So, what I asked should be kept secret." Lilika wondered aloud, still in shock. "His Majesty torments my mother every night. But why the hell was he doing that?" Just thinking about it, the little one started to sweat. Lilika knew the dreadful rumors about the emperor. Maybe he abused her mother, beat her or made her scream every night. When she thought of her mother's exhausted face today, her anxiety turned to determination. "This cannot happen again. However, I must follow the rules of the palace to stop him." What can I do as Lilika Naratakar? Lilika shook her head as she tried to get used to her full name again, which still seemed unfamiliar to her. But her concern prevailed over her thoughts. Lilika, who had returned to her room after walking down the long corridor, swallowed her saliva and asked the maid. Can you give His Majesty a request for an audience? The maid looked at Lilika in bewilderment. Are you asking for an audience? Yeah, no, yes. Very well. The maid called the attendant and repeated Lilika's request. The servant looked surprised, but soon left and returned shortly after. His Majesty says if it's just a moment, you can see him. I felt her hand shake as she followed the maid. It's okay, Lilika. Everything's going to be all right. While she was paying attention to her appearance, the little girl walked down the long corridor which seemed to be much shorter this time. Lilika arrived in front of the Emperor's office in an instant. It was her first time here, so she felt the need to take a deep breath. The maid opened her mouth. Princess Lilika has arrived. The office door opened without a word from inside. The servant bowed and Lilika entered alone. She was so nervous that she forgot not to look straight ahead. No one was to be seen standing in His Majesty's office. He was sitting at his big desk, and she was looking at him straight in the eye. He didn't take his eyes off his papers, but Lilika bent her knees hastily. What is going on? A low, crushing voice rang out. Lilika, feeling a cold sweat running down her back, explained. I came to make a request. Say it. Am my mother. Inhaling for a moment, Lilika gave strength to her voice. Stop tormenting my mother every night. She raised her voice as loud as she could, but it wasn't resounding either. However, the office became silent as if time had stopped. And the next moment, she heard an, oh, and a, wow. Small sounds of exclamation echoed in the office. Surprised, Lilika added, without realizing it, something close to an excuse. Mother doesn't seem to be getting a good night's sleep so she can't even wake up in the morning, since it's too hard, so, please stop harassing her. His Majesty stared blankly at Lilika and opened his mouth as if embarrassed. Wait, of course, your mother likes. Cough of eyes widened at the sudden coughs blooming everywhere in the room. His Majesty frowned and closed his mouth. She hadn't learned it yet, but maybe it was polite to cough when His Majesty speaks. Looking at him directly in the eye, Lilika opened her mouth slightly. Kofu, poa ha ha ha. A burst of explosive laughter was heard. Taken aback, Lilika turned her head. A tall man with papers in his hands stood in front of the Emperor's desk. He had crouched down and tried to silence the laughter in the room, but Lilika noticed that his back was still shaking uncontrollably. Annoyance could be read in His Majesty's eyes. It was then that Lilika realized that there were two other people in the office besides His Majesty. No, she had already noticed them, but she hadn't yet analyzed their presence in detail. The tall, smiling guy seemed to be a knight, and the other man, an assistant perhaps. Seeing Lilika all embarrassed without even being able to understand the situation, the man who was standing behind His Majesty approached her. He was a gentle-faced man with brown hair and hazel eyes. He had caught her attention because he wore a monocle over one eye. The dark circles under his eyes were also impressive. He knelt on one knee to make eye contact with Lilika. Do not worry, that idiot isn't laughing at you. You are a very brave princess. He added with a smile. His Majesty will no longer harass the Empress every night from now on. Oi, His Majesty refuted, but the man answered him, much to his surprise, looking back at the most powerful man in the land without raising even an eyebrow. Will you not? Hearing those words made His Majesty look like he had chewed on a shell filled with mud. Then, he looked at Lilika and he sighed, his face pale and white. Okay, thank you so much. Lilika smiled, broadly as she thanked him. She immediately lowered her head and gently clasped her hands. I'm going to take my leave now. Why? His Majesty asked with a smirk. Startled, Lilika looked up again. Sorry, come here. His Majesty gestured with his finger as Lilika took a step or two towards him. Just there. Why are you trying to harass the pretty princess? His Majesty's eyes widened at the dark-haired man's words. When did I harass her? I just told her to come over here. Then, he looked at Lilika. Come on, come here now. Lilika gathered her courage and walked around the desk to stand in front of the emperor. However, to her surprise, His Majesty picked her up and placed her on his knees. It's like lifting a candy shell. The only thing I hear is her clothes crinkling. You love your daughter so much, so why did you starve her? His Majesty's words made Lilika furious. She couldn't stand someone insulting her mother. I'm not hungry. Then why are you so light? If I pushed you with my finger, I think you would fall. My body is strong, Lilika answered without realizing. If a person was not in good health, he would not find a job. So, this answer came naturally to her. But look, by just doing that. His Majesty grabbed his middle finger with his thumb and the little girl fell. The shock of the flick made a loud click. Lilika, who was sitting facing the emperor in an unsteady posture, fell backwards to the floor. The child's face turned scarlet. Her forehead and head hurt, but she was even more embarrassed that she fell so easily, so Lilika tried to be on her feet quickly. Fortunately, the carpet was soft, which prevented serious injuries. But the other two men in the office screamed in shock. Your Majesty, Alteos. The knight called out the emperor's name before approaching and lifting Lilika into a warm embrace. Oh, the princess is as light as a sugar cookie. Your Majesty, what is the meaning of this? Princess, how are you? Your forehead has turned red. And how is the back of your head? Can you tell me if it hurts when I touch you? When she saw the friendly, worried look on his face, Lilika held back her tears. I'm okay, everything is fine. But everyone could see the tears flowing. The man's voice grew cold. Your Majesty, His Majesty replied. She said she was strong. Adil is not so sulky. He was annoyed that His Majesty didn't understand difference between girl and boy. Then he spoke. Besides being a Takar, the Crown Prince is a well-trained boy. At this, His Majesty took a deep breath and said, I'm sorry, it's my first time with a daughter. I will ask the Imperial Doctor to come. Now sit down comfortably, Princess. He said as he sat Lilika down on the couch in the corner of the office. After a while, the doctor entered the room. The Imperial Doctor, who came with a medical bag, winced upon seeing the faces in the office. His Majesty the Emperor, the Prime Minister and the Commander-in-Chief of the Knights Guards. All the key people in the Empire were gathered. The doctor approached and asked, where were you hurt? He looked at Lilika's wounds and told her that if she put ointment on them, they would go away quickly. After a while, the Imperial Doctor applied some ointment to her forehead and placed a plaster over it. As soon as he left, the attendant came in with the snacks. There was chocolate in a small cup and a bowl of fried breadsticks. It was obvious that the chef, who had to make snacks in a hurry, had racked his brains. You can dip bread in hot chocolate and eat it. The attendant explained nicely before leaving. Hesitantly, Lilika looked at the beautiful silver tray and asked, you're not going to eat it with me? No, just eat. This was ordered for the princess, wasn't it? Enjoy it. Alteos and Tan said one after the other. Indulging their demands, Lilika carefully pricked the fried bread with a silver fork, dipped it in the chocolate, and then put it in her mouth. And her expression brightened. Seeing the girl like this, the three men also had happy expressions on their faces without realizing it. Lilika couldn't believe such a thing could exist in this world. She continued to dip the bread in the hot chocolate and ate the rest of the food diligently. Let's order something else to drink. Isn't milk enough? After eating sweet bread and refreshed, the most influential person in the palace is the emperor. Alteos stared intently at his new daughter. In fact, he had completely forgotten about her existence. But now she had become unforgettable. How could he forget such an impactful meeting in person? The brown, semi-curly hair had a slightly spongy look, very different from her mother's, but their eye color was similar. Lilika met His Majesty's piercing gaze and her forehead hurt again. She had the same impression of His Majesty as the first time she had seen him. He was tall and very handsome, but one aspect of him didn't seem human. She had heard and thought he was a very scary person, but seeing him like that, she thought maybe he wasn't that bad. Washing her mouth with milk, Lilika exhaled a phew before saying, thank you for the meal. As she thanked the adults, the girl also held the glass of milk tightly with both hands as she was afraid of dropping it. Then, when she looked up to greet them, she was surprised to see the three of them looking at her with a warm gaze. "Ah, do I have something on my face?" Lat shook his head, but the little one still wondered if she had eaten messily or if there was a trace of food left in the corner of her mouth. "No, it's just that the princess is very cute." At Lat's words, Lilika's face flushed red. It was the first time she had heard someone say. Lat nodded then asked, "That's a different question, but are you enjoying your life right now?" Lilika looked up and replied to Lat, "I'm working hard." It was a strange response, but Lat smiled anyway. "I understand that too. Your Majesty, how about making Bryn the princess's servant?" Tan raised an eyebrow. Alteos, meanwhile, looked at Lat for a moment then nodded. "Good idea. Indeed, it would be preferable for the position to go to a young person." Lat spoke with a soft smile and turned to Lilika. Lilika thought Lat wasn't as good a person as he appeared to be. It is rare for a good person to have such a high position. Being nice didn't mean having a weak heart, but in Lilika's mind, it was all the same. People in high positions are determined, sometimes cold and heartless. So, wouldn't the Prime Minister, Lat, be the same? "Okay, I'll let you two talk about work. Princess, come, I'll walk you back." Tan waved with her hand, thus ending the conversation. Lilika hurriedly jumped up from the sofa and said, "It's okay, I can go back alone." "No, you can't. A princess should not be seen without company. I could let a servant do it, but I will do it today." Tan retorted with a wink. Then he added, "Thanks to you, I was able to skip work for a while." Lilika replied, "Really?" She was embarrassed, not knowing how to react. Instantly, Tan grabbed her and placed her on his shoulder. "Hya!" Tan gripped the flabbergasted Lilika's legs to hold her in place. Due to the several layers of petticoats worn inside, no one saw the girl's underwear, which saved her from an embarrassing situation. However, the posture she was in seemed rather shameful to her. Sir Tan. You can just call me Tan. The Takar never call others this way unless they are among themselves." Tan smiled and left the office with Lilika on her shoulder. The attendant who was waiting outside widened his eyes. Of course, Lilika was very embarrassed, but Tan didn't even notice. However, even though she was high up, she wasn't afraid of falling because Tan's hand held her in place firmly and his shoulders were wide and comfortable. In addition, it was quite pleasant to contemplate the surroundings from this height. "Okay, let's stop caring about the shame. Maybe this is how a princess goes for a walk. And I am a princess now. So, let's act like one." But Lilika still tried to regain her dignity by positioning herself differently. "Guide me to the princess's residence." At Tan's words, the attendant took the lead and began to show them the way. Lilika looked around and asked what came to her mind. "By the way, Tan." It tickled Lilika internally when she disrespectfully called out the name of someone much older and taller than her. "Yes, princess." But Tan responded immediately as if he didn't care. "If you have the surname Wolf, maybe you know Lao." The reason the words sounded so stretched out was that Lilika passed from talking with honorific to without it. Tan nodded. "He is also part of my clan. Maybe about 6 villages further." "That's what I thought. Tell him I'm sorry for the rude words I said the other day." Lilika asked in a small whisper. Tan replied with a curious face. "Rude words? I mean, I thought Lao was trying to kidnap me." At her explanation, Tan simply smiled again. "Princess, I want to say some pretty harsh words to you, may I?" "Yes." "On those words, please excuse me." Tan, in a knightly manner, saluted her respectfully. Lilika let out a long sigh. She had used too much energy this morning. She also had to rest until Mrs. Glendoran arrived. Nevertheless, the fried bread was delicious. Hot chocolate too. And what about this wonderful taste? She hadn't expected this black liquid to be so delicious. Lilika thought before sitting down in the high chair that was placed near the window. She could see part of the garden from here, so she liked to sit on that side. She could see part of the garden from here, so she liked to sit on that side. The little one stared fixedly at the garden, and just as she was about to open a spelling book, she heard a hubbub coming from outside. The door swung open and a girl who looked to be about 15 years old entered. A shiny headband drew Lilika's attention to her short, neat hair. She strode forward and gave a deft curtsy to Lilika, who was sitting in front of her, and said, "My name is Bryn Saul, Your Highness. From today onward, I am the servant of the Imperial Princess. Please take care of me." "Oh, that's right. Lat had mentioned her earlier." Lilika nodded. "Take good care of me too." Bryn stopped her curtsy and clasped her hands tightly. "So, Princess, I have orders from His Majesty to move your room. So, I'll help you move out first. Now, don't worry and follow me. The servants will carry your luggage." Lilika was puzzled, but she had no choice but to follow His Majesty's orders. Entering the new room, Lilika let out a small cry of exclamation. The original room was incredibly colorful and pretty, but not as much as the new one. When she entered the room, she saw a lovely living room. Then, the window which offered a bright view of the whole garden, and that, at a single glance. The bedroom also had a large window, framed by a thin, delicate ledge. It seemed that this room was at least 3 times larger than the previous one, so just walking around this room was a bit of an exercise for Lilika. Then Bryn asked, "How do you like it, Princess? Do you like your new room? It is also closer to the residence of the Empress." "Really? Yes, I love it. I can also see the entire garden from the window. Can I go out?" The previous room didn't have a balcony, but this one had a big enough one. "Sure." Bryn opened the window and Lilika cautiously stepped out onto the balcony. "Wow," the girl exclaimed happily. Standing in such a high place made her heart race, but she also found it amusing. It looked like when the commander-in-chief of the Knights Guards had slung her over his shoulder earlier. The balcony was also large enough to drink tea. Bryn smiled with satisfaction. "I'm glad you like it, Princess. This room is called the White Dragon Room." "White Dragon?" "Yes. You know the first Emperor Takar is a dragon, right? In the Sun Palace, all rooms of the imperial family have dragons. The Crown Prince lives in the chamber of the Black Dragon. And the Empress room is always the Silver Dragon's room." "I see." She didn't know that at all. So, what was the old room called? Lilika didn't ask because it might put Bryn in a sticky situation. Anyway, the previous room was probably not named after a dragon. "Why don't you contact the Empress and visit her? It's tea time." "May I?" Bryn grinned brightly when she saw a smile bloom on Lilika's face. "Yes, of course." Bryn ordered another maid, "Pass the message to the Empress." All the maids Lilika had originally changed, but they obeyed Bryn as if they always had been her maidservants. Indeed, her mother's room was not too far, just up the stairs. Her mother enters the room with a smile. As soon as she entered the drawing room, her mother hugged her. Lilika busted into a happy laugh. Her mother then asks, "Lily, you said you went to visit His Majesty the Emperor." Lilika looked at Lydia, startled by her words. She didn't expect her mother to know about it already. Looking at her daughter half-heartedly, Lydia explained, "His Majesty has come to tell me." "His Majesty?" "Yes." Lydia sighed and hugged her daughter around her shoulders. "Lily, I appreciate your kind gesture, but you don't have to risk anything. You don't know how surprised Mom was to hear the news." However, Lilika bowed her head. Her mother hugged her tightly and gently stroked her hair with her fingertips. "I know, my sweet Lily is worried about her mother. But Mommy is also worried about Lily." "Yes." Lydia smiled and kissed her daughter's forehead. Then, Lilika said softly, "Still, His Majesty didn't seem like a bad person. That's why it's dangerous." Lydia said seriously, "You shouldn't believe that because he treated you with kindness once. That doesn't make him a nice person. Got it? That man can slit another person's throat with a smile on his face." At the warning, Lilika swallowed her saliva and nodded. Lydia relaxed her expression. "I don't mean to scare you, but it's better to be careful. Anyway, thank you. I feel better now. Would you like to sleep with Mommy tonight?" She smiles at her mother and asks, "Really?" Her mother replied, "Yeah, let's sleep together since it has been a long time." Her mother said, "Let's go and spend time together." But Lilika told her mother that, "I have an etiquette lesson today." Then Bryn interrupts in mother and daughter conversation. She explained to Mrs. Glendoran that Lilika's forehead was injured, so she told her not to take a class today. Lydia hugged Lily tightly and looked at Bryn. Who are you? My name is Bryn Saul, Your Majesty. I have been newly appointed as Princess Lilika's handmaiden. You're from the Saul family. As her mother spoke in a strange tone, Lilika raised her head. Her mother looked at Bryn with a smile. Bryn was also smiling and gently lowering her gaze. It's nice, Lydia said and looked at her daughter, who pondered in her arms, a bit puzzled. I'm telling you, NB, it's Lydia's inner thoughts. She thought she was worried about Lilika, but her daughter already made her place in the palace. House Saul has served the Takar imperial family for generations. Serving House Takar has been a great source of pride for them. The fact that a direct descendant like Bryn Saul is assigned to Lyrica means that they're willing to treat Rika like a real member of the imperial family. Lydia laughed. She was worried and proud of her daughter at the same time. Until Lydia took her place as empress, Lilika had no choice but to stay in the guest room. Because the emperor didn't care about it. Lydia thought she wouldn't be able to replace the maids or teachers around Lily until she took control of the inner palace. In her previous life, there were a lot of people who secretly sabotaged her under the pretext of not acknowledging her, a woman who became empress overnight. However, didn't Lily go to the emperor directly and win her place with her own hands? She was so cute. The emperor was bound to be left out. She snorted inwardly. Just try to raise one finger on my Lily. Mother. Lilika tilted her head when she saw her mother smirking silently. She was adorable. How can her daughter be so lovable? And why didn't she notice it before? Regretting her past foolishness, Lydia hugged Lily twice as hard. Lilika giggled in a jolt of joy. Her mother wrapped her arms around Lily. Her mother started hugging her tightly and she again started panicking, when her past life memories flashed back. Lilika can't understand why her mother sometimes cry, and laugh at the same time. Her mother again looked at Lilika and said, I love you my daughter. Lilika smiled brightly at her mother's words. Tea and sweets were delicious, but above all else, she was happy to spend time with her mother. In the meantime, a tailor came by and brought a new style of dress design. Everything was pretty and beautiful, but Lilika was a little disappointed. The dress named, Bustle Style, was, of course, pretty. Her mother also said that from now on, this dress is going to take over the world. And the tailor laughed. It already has. That's what Lilika wanted to say. Lilika thought that this clothing was probably a crinoline dress that was widespread in high society. But she couldn't tell her mother about that. Time flew by as she watched her mother put on new dresses, talked with her, and made party invitations. It was incomparably blissful to fall asleep in her mother's gentle embrace, wearing soft pajamas and sleeping on downy pillows at night. In the morning, Lilika overslept for a long time. Obviously, mother had told me not to visit His Majesty but somehow, since that day, Lilika was called to His Majesty's office every day. She didn't do much when she went there. Snacks were served, and while eating the sweets, she just listened to the stories of His Majesty, Lat, and Tan who often appeared. Her mother was dumbfounded about this situation and had argued with His Majesty, but His Majesty seemed to have won. Delicious snacks were brought every day, and Lilika slowly got used to the office atmosphere and relaxed a bit. Sometimes, she came to her senses thinking about her mother's words. When His Majesty asked questions, Lilika answered them as seriously as possible. Then, for some reason, Tan often smiled peacefully, and Lat turned his head and coughed lightly. Alteos sighed as he looked at Lilika. Why doesn't she grow up? Lat raised his brows, asking what he was talking about. What do you mean all of a sudden? The little one. Why isn't she growing up when I feed her so well? Your Majesty, it hasn't even been 10 days yet. Adults seem to be growing every day. Maybe she has some kind of disease. Your Majesty, the princess is not a Takar, not a Bharat, not a Sander, not a wolf, and she is not a noble in any way. Lilika rolled her eyes. She raised one of her hands, and Alteos asked. What? I don't have any disease and I'm strong. I also am growing well. Bryn said I will soon be able to wear bigger clothes. Then, Lilika added cautiously. And I'm also a Takar. Although she was an adopted daughter, she was a Takar anyway. Lilika Nara Takar. Isn't that her new name? As a contract princess, she insisted that Takar was correct. There's no point in signing a contract if you stepped back from an important position, right? Lat smiled brightly at Lilika's words. That's right. The princess is also a Takar. Are you really growing? Aren't you supposed to grow up at least one finger a week? Alteos said and looked at Lilika half-heartedly. Yet, if I take a closer look, your face is definitely smoother and less dry than when we first met. I don't think there's anyone who grows up like what you're describing. If that was the case, then it would be a disease. At Lilika's words, Alteos raised an eyebrow and smiled. I grew up like that. Well, your majesty is not human. It was said as a joke, but a subtle atmosphere spread throughout the office like a wave. Who said that? Alteos asked lightly, but Lilika knew there was more to it. She had to answer without making any mistakes. Lilika said softly. Bryn said it. The imperial family are descendants of dragons. So, you're a dragon. Alteos sighed with relief and his expression loosened. Then, Lat intervened. The princess is right. But saying that His Majesty is not a person can be misunderstood, so it is better not to say it. Well, that's what everyone thinks. Alteos snorted. Lilika explained quickly. I thought it was really cool when I heard it. It's truly awesome. When Bryn had explained the name of her new room, Lilika had asked, then, what do you call His Majesty's room? Bryn had replied with a smile. His Majesty's room doesn't have a dragon's name. Because His Majesty is a dragon. I was impressed with the story. I thought it was a myth becoming reality. Lilika tried her best to convey that emotion to His Majesty. At Lilika's words, Alteos gestured with his hand. Realizing that he was telling her to come closer, Lilika hurried towards him. Alteos thought it was funny. He'd be dead if he dragged her by the hand. She had to come voluntarily. It was not that Lilika was fearless when she approached him. He knew that. He also knew he could very well threaten her. But she believed that he wouldn't hurt her, and seeing her running toward him like this, he didn't want to break that trust. He put his arms around her waist and placed her on his lap. Now that he was used to it, his posture was much better than before. A child's heart was beating much faster, with a much smaller sound than an adult's. Their body temperature was high, and their weight was surprisingly light. Few people could look directly at him, but when Lilika acted this way, she looked just like her mother. Lydia is the same. Lydia, who offered him a contract marriage, looked at him like this. Until the Crown Prince Adel becomes emperor, he will be her support. To be able to do everything as the Empress of the Empire. However, there are limits to what the Emperor can do, and the social world is a completely different battlefield. Could she handle all those sly foxes? So far, she has been doing better than expected. But compared to such a mother, what could he say about her daughter? It's a type I've never seen before. It was interesting because she was the type of human being that was difficult to see in court. Your Majesty, as Lilika called him carefully while tilting her head, Alteos grinned. Why do you call me Your Majesty? He spoke. Excuse me. She was puzzled. He continued. Am I not your father? She startled and spoke. Yes. Well, yes, that is correct. He continued. Then, now, call me. Seeing Alteos talking like that, Lilika looked around. Lat was watching their interaction with interest. Well, her thoughts started to swirl round and round. His Majesty was scary, but also a good man. However, did that mean she was allowed to call him father? Even if it's just for work. Did she have to call him that way because of her new job? But wouldn't she be told that her behavior was arrogant? Lilika repeated the words in her head. Father, father. To her, a father was something that existed only in dreams. But in front of her, was the person who would be her father for at least 8 years. He existed now, in reality. When she thought about it, for some reason, tears flowed down her cheeks. Lilika was startled and slapped her cheeks. No adult liked to see a child cry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Stop it. Alteos grabbed her hands. She hit herself because there was nowhere else to hit. I'm sorry. No, just because I married your mother doesn't mean I magically became a father to you. It's my fault for forcing you like that, Alteos said and reached out to Lat. Handkerchief. Lat silently handed him a clean handkerchief. Alteos, as he wiped Lilika's face, continued. It's all right. You didn't do anything wrong. Your mother will go crazy again if she finds out that I made you cry. As he sighed, Lilika smiled involuntarily. Regardless, it was fortunate that the relationship between her mother and His Majesty seemed to be good. Come on, blow it here. Lilika's face turned bright red when she was told to blow her nose. You're embarrassing her, so stop it, Lat said. I'll do it. Taking the handkerchief from Alteo's hand, Lilika wiped away her tears and runny nose. Then, Alteos ruffled her hair abruptly. Recognizing that it was a rough but caring touch, Lilika smiled. Taking the handkerchief from Lilika's hand, and throwing it at Lat, Alteos said. Well then, let's go back to work. With Lilika on his lap, he turned the chair to the desk. It didn't look like he was going to ask to call him father anymore. Lilika felt sorry for it, so she repeated the word father in her head and silently moved her tongue. She suddenly felt closer to the fearful emperor. Father, will he ask her to call him this way again? Tickles pricked her stomach as she was feeling embarrassed. But she was happy maybe in future her dream would come true. From one arm His Majesty was holding her as well as he was doing his work. Both Tan and Lad also resumed their work. She didn't notice it before because it was covered with paper, but the ink had overflowed and was drying near the inkwell. Pencils were also rolling around wildly in a sea of crumpled paper. Lilika couldn't stand that her father's, no, His Majesty's desk was so dirty. She wanted to do something for His Majesty. Lilika said cautiously, Excuse me, Your Majesty. What? Can I wipe the ink bottle for you? Ink bottle. The ink is dry at the entrance. It will be much cleaner if you wipe it with warm water. Lilika said, pointing toward his inkwell. Lat frowned and was about to say something, but Alteos meekly agreed. All right, Your Majesty, who cares? I'm saying this because I don't like people going back and forth. Lilika, you can use anyone you want, so make yourself comfortable in the office. At Alteo's words, Lat pressed his palm to his forehead. His Majesty could think that was just favoritism, but wasn't he just pampering the princess? It was dizzy to think that a child was walking around the office. It was more likely that things to do would increase. In fact, Alteos said he didn't like when his office became crowded, so only the Prime Minister, Lat, and sometimes Tan, were allowed to enter the office at all times. Therefore, while Lat had to do his usual paperwork, he felt his head spin thinking that the work could potentially increase again. Lilika quickly called the attendant to bring her warm water, a cloth, a bag and a stepping board. She seemed quite accustomed to calling people over. She wiped the inkwell clean and started moving around to tidy up the office. The contents of the trash can were first put in the bag, before being thrown outside to separate the processed and non-processed documents. To his surprise, the little girl seemed to be able to read letters. When Lat asked, her face turned red and she mumbled quietly, I know just a few of them. In addition to that, she worked much more diligently than Lat had expected, such as replenishing the stacks with new papers. Tan, who came in a bit later, quickly noticed that the office had been cleaned. Thanks to the princess, the office is tidy. After complimenting her for her excellence, he gave her a glass bottle full of colorful candies and spoke, I wonder if it's okay to have the princess do chores. Lilika was delighted and gave candy to His Majesty and Lat, and later on to Bryn. Sir Wolf. Bryn looked at the candies in the glass bottle and asked. Lilika nodded her head. She carefully wrapped the glass bottle with both hands and lifted it. The glass bottle was very pretty, the colored candy inside beautiful, and even the taste was sweet. But isn't calling him Sir Wolf too much? I know that I add, Sir, to his name, but am I wrong to do that? Bryn giggled at Lilika's question. Yes, but Sir Wolf's synonymous with Sir Tan Wolf, so wouldn't it be okay? She enjoyed the candy Lilika gave her by rolling the sweet thing inside her mouth. The Saul family had served the imperial family for generations and took great pride in serving the Takar family. Of course, some in the Saul family were angry that they attached Bryn to a child who is not a real Takar. But Bryn thought it was ridiculous. His Majesty the Emperor was the Emperor. If it was a Takar's command, even if the other person was not a real Takar, you must serve them as if they were. In addition, the current Emperor's temper was quite twisted, so the Saul family would be pushed away if they refused. Didn't they know that? Besides, Bryn liked this princess much more than the real Takar family. Her older brother, Bran, was a servant of the crown prince, and wasn't he already on stomach pills? She liked the fact that her new master was ordinary. It made her stand out more in this monster heaven. Then, the princess looked into the candy bottle and asked seriously. Excuse me, Bryn. Bryn came closer. She spoke. Yes, princess. Do you think I'm not growing up? Lilika was still worried about Altio's words. Bryn tilted her head at her question and asked. No, you're growing well. Where did you hear that? The truth is. Bryn giggled as Lilika recounted Alteo's and Lat's conversation. Then, she said, Princess, can I tell you an interesting story? Anything. Bryn's stories are always good. Bryn started the conversation after laughing brightly at Lilika's words. Your Highness, I told you that the Takar family descended from dragons, right? Yes. Shall we talk more about the founding of our country? People in the old days used to be great wizards. They could do anything they thought. God told them to use their will for good, but people didn't. And then there was a conflict, and the human continent broke down and sank. Lilika's ears pricked up. It was the first time she heard this story. When she was in the slums, all she could hear were swear words or talks about money. There was no chance for her to hear such an old story. But some people listened to God's command and built a boat on top of the mountain. The moment the continent crashed and sank, a dragon came, grabbed the boat and flew away. Those on board survived, and they came over to this land where we are now. Bryn lowered her voice and took an eerie tone. At that time, the land was covered with dark forests and swamps, and there were all kinds of monsters living there. Dragons and humans set up their homes, fought against monsters, and pioneered the country. Was that dragon a Takar? Suddenly Lilika asked a question, and Bryn nodded. That's right. It is said the dragon turned into a human and led the people. As the country expanded, some intelligent monsters asked if they could join the dragon as well. Bryn raised her arms high above her head and said, there were wolves this big. Their descendants are said to be the wolf family. There also were snakes as thick and big as a rhododendron tree, and their descendants are called Sander. Lilika's eyes widened. So, she was saying that Lat's ancestor was a snake and Tan's ancestor a wolf. Bryn wrapped up the story. The dragon made them human, and they swore allegiance to the dragon. It is said that if they disobey the dragon, they will return to their original form. So, if you look at the crests of high nobles, they are often animals. Then, with a slightly bored face, she said slowly. And as if to prove it, they are all strong, and very healthy. I see. Lilika exhaled a long breath. It would have been much more exciting to listen to this story by a bonfire in the dark of the night, but hearing it now was interesting too. I understand better. Lat is a snake and Tan a wolf. It suited them. It also explained why they didn't always get along. So, the princess is growing up well. It's just that they are growing up too well. Yes. Lilika nodded her head vigorously. She went on to ask. Then do Bryn's family have such a story? Bryn spoke. Yes, it is said we were crows. We were smart and cunning, so the dragon kept us as servants. At Bryn's words, Lilika laughed and nodded. She now understood why Bryn's headband sparkled. Bryn knows a lot more about the Imperial Palace than I do. Of course, the little girl thought she would, but every time she heard a story like this, she realized it anew. I can't work properly if I don't know anything. A contract princess. A contract daughter. Even if it was something that came as an addition to her mother's contract, and it wasn't expected of her, Lilika's pride depended on it. Somehow, Lilika wanted to finish this contract splendidly. That way, she thought she would be proud when she finished the contract and moved into a house with a garden with her mother. So, she really needed information. Information that would make her a great princess. Bryn. Yes, princess. Sit here. Lilika tapped the seat next to her. Bryn said, I'm sorry, and sat down lightly on the sofa. I want to be a great princess. If she was going to become a princess anyway, wouldn't it be better to be an excellent princess rather than a mediocre one? As Lilika expressed her wish, Bryn nodded earnestly and said, I understand. But I don't know anything about the Imperial Palace. My knowledge is limited about the nobles, and above all, the Imperial family. Bryn, you know much more than I do because you have served the Imperial family for a long time. Lilika held Bryn's hand tightly and said with the purest expression on her face. So, Bryn, will you help me? Oh, my goodness. Bryn, her cheeks slightly red, suspired. As a member of the Saul family who has served the Takar for a long time, she never imagined she would hear such words from a Takar. As Takar only dominate and order. I have never thought someone from Takar will ask from a Saul family for help. But it's true that this child isn't a real Takar. Some members of my family are angry that I, a direct descendant, have been assigned to her. But this is the Emperor's order. And a Takar's command is absolute. Besides, with the current Emperor's temper, I bet he'd destroy us all if he didn't get his way. Or we would turn back into crows. Honestly, I like the princess regardless of all that. Even more than the real Takar will ask. She stands out even more in this palace full of monsters because she's ordinary and simple. And also she is so adorable and cute. With a big smile Bryn spoke. Of course, princess. I, Bryn Saul, will help you with all my heart. Leave it to me. Thank you, Bryn. Lilika spoke. Bryn looked at her twinkling eyes and asked, so, what do you want to know first? The Imperial Palace. The palace. Bryn tilted her head, a bit surprised. Lilika explained, from now on, this is my house. But it's not just that I don't know its structure well yet. I don't even know who lives there. No matter what kind of house someone entered and what he had to do there, the first thing he needed to understand was its hierarchy. She had to figure out how people moved, what their allegiance was and their identity. Only then would she be able to move freely and proceed to the next step. Bryn smiled broadly. I understand. You can trust me. The next day, it was the floor plan of the palace that Bryn preciously put on a long table. If it was known that she had an item that was meticulously marked with every secret passage, her tongue would be removed. Unaware of it, Lilika was just amazed. How many rooms are there? It's amazing. What's this passage? It's the servants' aisle. It's connected to those servants' doors. There's a separate way for servants. Huh, I didn't know. What about this? It's a secret escape route. Lilika asked. If it's a secret escape route, is it okay to draw it on the map? Normally not, Bryn replied nonchalantly. But the Saul family has a deep connection with the Imperial family. As expected, I'm glad I asked Bryn. Foo-foo. Lilika spoke. Bryn smiled lightly, then rolled up the map and said, after roughly studying the Imperial Palace's structure, it's best to walk around to help us memorize it. Even if it's bothersome. Yes. And it's okay. It doesn't bother me at all. It was boring to stay in the room all the time, so Lilika quickly jumped out of her chair. Lilika and Bryn walked around the palace grounds. Often there was a room blocked off by soldiers. Lilika asks why he is blocking her way. He replied that someone's place is off limits, you can't enter. The soldier was very rude, and he didn't greet Lilika properly like other people in the palace. Bryn's eyes narrowed, but she had to turn around to appease her bubbling annoyance. Lilika thought she should create problems for others, so she quietly left with Bryn. It was not easy to look around because the Sun Palace alone was enormous. In addition, as they walked around actively, everyone they met had to step back toward the hallway and get used to bowing to Lilika. Princess Lat. Meeting a familiar face, Lilika greeted him warmly. Lat, who said hello in return, raised his head and commented. "You look busy," she replied. "I'm walking around, trying to figure out the structure of the palace." "The structure," he replied. She continued. "Yes, it's my house, so I thought I should know." "That's right." Lat smiled brightly when she said that. "Was there a place you could not go into?" She spoke. "Ah, yes. There was a place the soldiers blocked." "Oh, dear." Lat smiled coldly before speaking kindly to Lilika. "If you go to the Knight's Guard's room, Tan will be there. Talk to him and tell him about those soldiers." "Yes," she replied. Lat come close and ask. "What is the princess's last name?" "Takar," she replied. "Yes, do not forget that." Lat straightened his back and looked at Bryn, then said. "It's wonderful to have the support of the Sol family." Bryn grinned. Lat said that he would excuse himself first, and when Lilika allowed him, he quickly walked down the corridor and disappeared. Lilika asked, looking back at Bryn. "Do you know where the Night Guard's room is?" "Of course." Bryn began to walk with a brisk gait, and Lilika followed behind. There was a considerable distance between the Sun Palace and the Sky Palace. In addition, there were other small buildings on either side of it, and the Night Guard's place was one of them. Knights stood guard in front of the Night Guard's building, a wide smoke chamber behind them. Everyone gathered in twos and threes and chatted, but only one person stood far from them and guarded the door diligently. "Nice to see you again, Princess. What made you come this far?" She replied. "I'm here to see Tan. The Commander-in-Chief Wolf is inside." When Lilika stepped inside, she heard a roaring voice exclaim, "The princess is here." Lilika stiffened in surprise, then barely answered. "Hello." No wonder everyone was looking this way with sparkling eyes, so Lilika stretched her back. Everyone was very tall, so she wanted to look a little taller. She wanted to tiptoe, but the skirt was too short, so it would be obvious if she did that. Still, she raised her heels slightly, so that it was not noticeable. Princess. What are you doing here?" As it became noisy outside, Tan rushed out of a room. From the inside, a bitter cry rang out, "Commander, please, the documents." "I'm here because I have something to tell you. I met Lat earlier." Lilika stopped talking. She was concerned if it was something that could be said in front of so many people. Tan nodded as if he knew when he saw Lilika hesitating. "Excuse me for a moment." He gave her a big hug and Lilika let out a small scream in surprise. Tan turned his head to her and said, "Now, you can whisper, right? So, it's okay for the maid to put her weapon down. If she takes something like that in front of a wolf, she'll die." Astonished, Lilika turned around and saw Bryn holding a dagger. The knights around them were looking at her with narrowed eyes. They looked like real wolves. Lilika saw some of the knights' attitudes getting threatening, so she quickly said, "Bryn, it's okay. You must not recklessly touch the princess's body." Bryn spoke sharply and put the dagger away. Lilika didn't know where the dagger came from. Bryn shrugged. "That's why I apologized beforehand. And isn't it fine since we are friends?" "Friends?" When Lilika opened her eyes in surprise, Tan made a puzzled face. "Aren't we?" "Yes, we are. So, I'm happy, extremely happy," Lilika said with a bright smile on her face. Tan thought, how cute. And listened to her again. So, looking around, Lilika whispered in his ear. It was a story that members of the wolf family with good ears could easily perceive, but appearances were important, weren't they? "That's why I came to borrow a night." At Lilika's words, Tan lightly rubbed his chin and smiled. "I'll be the one to go." Lilika looked at the man standing in the doorway of the commander's room with a blank expression. Tan, who followed Lilika's gaze and turned around, said sternly. You know that working for the imperial family comes first. The old man sighed deeply and bowed his head. Please go, Commander. Yes. With a solemn nod, Tan walked out of the night guard's room while holding the princess lightly with one arm. Lilika said softly, I thought you'd say no. Ha ha ha. Laughing out loud, Tan said to Lilika. Princess, did you learn how many people you have to bow to? 3. Lilika spread 3 fingers. Tan nodded seriously. That's right, Princess. His Majesty's orders are called dragon words. And the dragon is absolute in this empire. Even if His Majesty put up a scarecrow and said, it's a Takar, all the nobles of the empire would have to bow before it. Lilika widened her eyes. For a while now, she was working hard to say confidently, I am a princess. I am a princess. She had memorized the phrase by heart, but she never thought it would be so powerful. Of course, His Majesty was great, and her mother was awesome too. Yet, the little girl thought she wasn't. But with this, Lilika felt like her eyes were suddenly opened. His Majesty has officially registered you as his daughter. Which means you're the only princess in the Takar Empire. Bryn nodded from behind. All kinds of negative words were about to come out of Lilika's mouth. She didn't know about Tan, but she was a contract princess and an adopted daughter, and only for a short time. Tan gently lifted his gaze that fixed the floor. He winked playfully. You are a princess who only needs to use her chin to lead the Imperial Night Guards. Huh. She was embarrassed and made a strange sound, but Tan was the one to laugh out loud. The distance, which was so long when she was the one to walk, was reduced in an instant thanks to Tan. He said casually in a light voice. There are only 4 Takars in existence today. His Majesty, the Empress, the Crown Prince, and the Princess. In other words, you're now second in line to the throne. That was beyond what Lilika could process. It didn't feel real. Lilika said, yes, but it doesn't matter because His Highness will be there anyway, right? Tan nodded. Yes. What I mean is that the princess has a very high position. Arriving at the entrance to the Sun Palace, Tan asked. So, where were you blocked? Can I lead you there? Bryn said with a smile on her face, and Tan nodded. Bryn added, how about catching him red-handed? Tan paused at those words and then grinned. As he put Lilika down, he said, shall we? Well, I'll be hiding here, so go ahead. He beckoned with both hands, so Lilika could understand the situation. She coughed and began to walk proudly but with a rather stiff gait in the eyes of others. The soldier stood in her way again. Can't I go in there? She could tell that her voice was squeaky. The soldier said with a frown. You cannot pass. She flinched, but at the thought of Bryn and Tan watching her, she couldn't back down. It took a lot of strength to raise her voice against such a large man with a weapon. Why can't I go? His Majesty's orders. If His Majesty had ordered so, wasn't it be inevitable? Lilika looked at Bryn with shaky eyes, and Bryn's smile grew even deeper. She opened her mouth. Does His Majesty's order specifically prevent the princess from passing through? The soldier pounded the floor with his spear immediately. In any case, this cannot be changed. What's wrong? A low, eerie voice came from behind the little girl. Lilika looked back in surprise. Bryn remained motionless, looking straight ahead. Tan's usual playful expression had disappeared from his face, and an expressionless look, characteristic of a carnivore, took over. The soldier gasped in surprise. Tell me, what's going on? The pressure was felt even though Tan was approaching slowly. The soldier's face gradually turned white. Tan came right in front of the soldier and took the spear from his hand. Name. Tan, who was examining the spear, grabbed it and began to bend it without much difficulty. The soldier answered quickly. I'm John Enders, first-class soldier of the 1st Regiment. Okay, Enders, so what's wrong? That's. I know, accessing the Sun Palace indoors depends on the pass level, even for nobles. However, Does the royal family need a pass? The soldier trembled and spoke. No, they do not. Tan continue. Don't you recognize the maid here? He replied, no, sir. Tan became even angrier. Don't you know the basics? That the imperial family always has a servant close to them. No, sir. The soldier replied quickly, sweating profusely. Tan twisted with force the spear between them. Then go and get your superior. Tan said, returning the bent spear to him. The soldier grabbed the now pretzel spear with trembling hands and began to walk. It was a walk that made Lilika wonder what would happen if he fell. Tan looked at the soldier with an air of indifference. It was already shocking to him that the soldier dared to block the path of the princess, but he also looked down at her and threatened her by hitting the floor with a spear. It was impossible to imagine for someone from the wolf family, who valued children above all else. Tan felt disillusioned. Besides, it didn't matter she was adopted, Lilika was a legitimate princess. A soldier was not supposed to stand in her way. I expected backlash, but not to a little girl in a place like this. And it's only a first-class soldier. Tan smiled and said to Lilika, you can go comfortably now, princess. I will take care of it from here. He didn't need to show her how he was going to handle it. Lilika was secretly worried about what he had just said. If it was a fight, wouldn't it be more reassuring to have more people than to be alone? Will you be okay by yourself? I can stay with you. Tan blinked at those words. They were words he hadn't heard in a long time. The consideration that was put into it was quite enjoyable. Just in case, Lilika added. Of course, I know that Tan can do well on his own, but still. Tan wrinkled his eyes. Don't worry, I'll run to the princess if she ever feels scared. You don't have to go to her. Lilika looked back in surprise. His Majesty was standing from where they came. He was with Lat, and the Prime Minister gave Lilika a gentle glance. I greet His Majesty. Lilika greeted him quickly first, before Tan and Bryn. After replying, His Majesty sighed. Tan spoke. I was going to scold the soldier, but now, I will not even pray for his response. Isn't it funny? What kind of guts would a single soldier have to do such a thing? Maybe he has a pretty big stomach. Alteos looked at Lilika as he said so, and pressed his hand against her forehead. Stumbled a bit this time too, but she didn't fall. Alteos grinned as Lilika stood triumphantly. You are Takar. It has nothing to do with what kind of person you are, what you have, what you don't have, or whether you're worthy or not. I took you in as my daughter. Then everyone should kneel in front of you. Otherwise, it would be disobeying my words. Lat asked Tan. Who was it? 1st Regiment of the Guards, a first-class soldier. John Enders. Lat smiled pleasantly at Tan's answer. Ho ho. It's quite pleasant to foresee what's going to happen, Your Majesty. Then, Princess, please enjoy the Sun Palace to your heart's content. You can leave this to us. Lilika stared at Lat. As expected, the Prime Minister's smile didn't seem to announce anything good. Yes, I understand. Then, I will take my leave. Lilika greeted them and went inside with Bryn. There was no blockage after that. When they went to the place where other soldiers had blocked them, Bryn and Lilika saw a different soldier standing there and he treated Lilika with a keen attitude. I accept your bow. Passing in front of the soldier, Lilika spoke softly to Bryn. I guess the news broke out very quickly. Bryn chuckled. Absolutely. It's the princess's power. No one is insensitive to the affairs of the imperial family. Bryn added playfully. So, what does power taste like, Princess? The taste of power. Lilika's eyes widened at the unexpected words. They had lingered in her head the whole time she had looked around the Sun Palace with Bryn. The taste of power. Lilika stared half-heartedly at the apple pie as she ate her snack. If she hadn't become a princess, she wouldn't have been able to eat this, right? The taste of power. She thought of it as she fell asleep in her soft bed at night. She wouldn't have slept on this fluffy bed if she wasn't the princess, right? Is this the taste of power? Later in His Majesty's office, Lilika spoke her mind to Lat. Lat, who was looking at the documents happily, smiled. Princess, I think it's more about money than power. Lilika tilted her head. Listening to Lat's words, it seemed plausible. How much power can be arbitrary? As Alteos said, he threw documents on the floor casually. Lilika rushed over and picked them up, but Alteos threw other papers from his desk. Lilika ran to them as well. Alteos hurriedly threw more documents, and Lilika diligently picked them up like a squirrel gathering fallen acorns. Your Majesty. Lat frowned and called for Alteos, who held his chin and slipped the last document down. Before the documents fell on the floor, Lilika snatched them and said, "Hey." Then, with a satisfied face, she arranged the papers neatly and placed them on Lat's desk. Lat was impressed by the princess's diligence, who picked up the fallen documents and organized them by type. Then I think I have enough power. It was the first time she felt as comfortable as she was today. She felt uncomfortable because she didn't work. So, she was glad to have something to do in the office. Lilika said with a smile and a curtsy. Then, I'll be on my way. Bryn said she would introduce the kitchen staff today. I see. Have a good time. Lat got up and saw Lilika off. Closing the office door, he took off his monocle, the symbol of the Prime Minister, and wiped it lightly with the hem of his clothes. Thanks to you, the soldiers were replaced, and those inside the Sun Palace were completely changed to those in the Night Guards. The outside world will still use the soldiers to save face, but they will slowly be absorbed by the Night Guards. Furthermore, I heard the Empress recently changed the head maid and her servants as well. Lydia asked if I could change the head maid, so I told her it was the Empress' responsibility. After that, she seized evidence of embezzlement and replaced the head maid and other maids. She had wiped out the noble spies who had entered the inner palace. Lat looked pleased. The newly selected personnel also seemed appropriate. He wondered if she had seen the data he had been investigating. Alteos didn't expect Lydia to make such a bold move. It didn't seem like an empress's move without the support of a single family. She wasn't a pawn on a chessboard, she was the one playing chess. Going beyond what he had expected, Alteos was admiring her a lot. Lat said, "When there is a change, fishes under the water jump out. It's convenient now that I just have to fish." The Prime Minister asked while staring at the Emperor. "Isn't it necessary to attach an escort knight? You still haven't done it yet." "My apologies." Lat bowed his head. If Tan had heard it, he would have said that it was a conversation between cold-blooded animals, and that they would always stay cold-blooded even if they were shot down. The snake thought to himself and smiled faintly. Lilika stared at the Black Dragon room before walking away. When she arrived at the Silver Dragon room, her mother was sitting at her desk reading a letter. When Lilika came in, Lydia quickly got up from her seat. "Lily, it smells nice." As she hugged the little girl and kissed her on the cheek, Lilika smiled softly and hugged her mother back. "I went to the kitchen with Bryn today. We ate delicious food there and brought refreshments." To the kitchen. Lydia paused but was quickly relieved when she realized that she had recently changed the kitchen staff as well. Up until now, no one had tried to feed her daughter anything weird. There were so many delicious things to eat. "I see." Lydia beckoned the handmaid to receive the basket. While Bryn and the handmaid were setting up refreshments, Lydia and Lilika sat next to each other on the sofa. Lydia asked, "Did you go to the office again today?" "Yes, but His Majesty kept flinging the papers around." Masking herself with a smile, Lydia managed to hide her coldness. She muttered, "How dare that little dragon troubling my adorable daughter." She didn't feel comfortable with the Emperor pampering her daughter. However, it was true that soldiers were replaced not long ago for treating the princess disrespectfully, and that made Lilika's position more firmly established. She couldn't help but sigh. Lily is having a hard time. Not at all. It's rather enjoyable. Lilika grabbed her mother's hand and shook her head. Then, she asked, "What kind of letters did you receive?" "They are replies to my invitations. I'm going to open the salon." "That en," her mother whispered softly, I'm about to invest the down payment I received. Down payment. I got a down payment when I started this contract. Lydia gestured to the maids who had served refreshments to step back. Aren't we supposed to leave all the money we're using now, our jewelry and our clothes after the contract? We should definitely earn money while we're here. She was going to splurge with all the money from the down payment. Her investment options were simply endless. Lilika worried about her mother's confident words and said, "Mother, don't buy anything like a panacea, holy water or a pot of happiness. And beware of scammers." "Oh, Lily, don't worry, because there is no such thing. Mommy will only invest in investments that will yield a 100% profit." Lilika was even more worried when Lydia told her not to worry. Where in the world is a 100% safe place to invest? Lilika added, "Mother, you have to let me know if you're going to invest." "Absolutely. Of course," Lydia answered and took her daughter's hand. "And I have something to give to my dear Lily." "You do," she muttered. "Bring it." When Lydia gave the order, a maid came quickly with a tray. A silver coin was placed on a velvet cushion. Lilika was flabbergasted. "My silver coin. It took me a long time to find the same silver coin." He had promised to keep it separately, but that old man. Lydia frowned a little before smiling again. "Is this really your silver coin?" Yes, this is my silver coin." Lilika, bewitched, picked up the silver coin. She remembered everything, all the stains and scratches. It was her silver coin. Deep down in her heart, she had given up. She didn't even think about getting her silver coin back. If she received a new silver coin, she wouldn't need it because it wouldn't be the same. But she hadn't said a word since it was a foolish thing to say. However, the silver coin was back in her hands now. Lilika touched the silver coin several times. It was a silver coin that had soothed her every night. Her silver coin. Her vision was blurred. These days, her lacrimal glands seemed to be broken. But when Lydia hugged her and patted her on the head, the little girl knew it was okay to cry as much as she wanted. Lilika sobbed with joy and relief. She shed tears as the wounds in her heart melted away. "Thank you, Mother." "No, rather, I am thankful you forgave me and I feel sorry for being such a mother. But I couldn't find your other coins." "It's okay. The important thing is this silver coin." Even if her mother brought her other coins, Lilika wouldn't be able to tell them apart. Lydia wiped her chest. Lilika held out a small wallet. The wallet, which was opened with a snap, was embroidered with a cute raspberry pattern. "I'll put my coin in it." When she opened it, there were already some white coins in it. This is enough. Lilika didn't really care about the money, because her silver was worth a lot and she did not need money at the moment. So, it was more than enough for her. She was happy with her cute wallet, and carefully placed the silver coin in it. Lydia smiled brightly as she saw Lilika happy. It took a lot of work to find this silver coin, but seeing her daughter's smile made her feel that it was nothing. Lydia will continue to protect this smiling face. She won't be as foolish as she used to be. And she seemed to get along well with Bryn. Lilika held her wallet tightly and pursed her lips for a moment. Then she noticed the black dragon chamber of the Crown Prince. Lilika said, "This reminded me I had not met the Crown Prince yet. Even on the wedding day, he wasn't there." Bryn replied, "This is because His Highness is at his feudal territory. The Crown Prince of each generation has received feudal territory as part of his inheritance. Duke Rowan is the Crown Prince's feudal title." Lilika asks, "When he will be returning?" Bryn replied, "I have no idea. But I think so this is his time to come back to the palace." Meanwhile, a troop of young boys heading towards the capital. One boy said, "Your Highness, please slow down. We haven't made a single stop on our journey. Except Wolf." But the Crown Prince didn't care, he ignored him. One boy spoke, "How does it feel to be going home after half a year, Your Highness? You also have new family members now." The Crown Prince replied, "Shut up, don't spout nonsense. That's not my family." Meanwhile, Bryn and Lilika were talking about Prince. in the palace. Lilika was so happy that her big brother is coming back. The next day Lilika went to her mother. She spoke. I've heard about His Highness the Crown Prince. What? Did you hear any rumors? Empress asked. Lilika replied, no, that's not it. I heard he's coming back soon. Can we do a welcome party or something? Well, it's best if we don't. Is that so? Her daughter's shoulders drooped, and Lydia quickly explained the reason. The Crown Prince is very picky about food. He doesn't touch anything unless it's brought by his aides. So even if there is a party, it wouldn't be fun. But isn't he coming back after a long time? Besides, we started to live here so suddenly, you and me. What should we do if we're misunderstood? Come to think of it, she didn't even see him at the wedding. What would you think of a cousin who suddenly appeared in the next room? Her heart pounded with anxiety when she remembered the numerous stories about an evil stepmother. Maybe he'll misunderstand and think they'll treat him badly. Watching Lilika talk about it so earnestly, Lydia thought, no, Adel isn't like that. But there was no need to break her daughter's heart. After all, the next emperor will be Adel, so Lydia thought she should get along well with him. Since his childhood, assassination attempts have been so frequent that Adel had now had a hard time trusting other human beings. An escort knight who had served him for a long time even attempted to assassinate him, making him fall deeper into complete distrust. She's talking about her past life. I'm planning to prevent that incident and keep a reasonable distance. Let's think about something other than a welcome party. We could just let them know they are welcome. Yes. Lilika's face brightened at Lydia's words. Then, she said with her hands folded, I've been thinking, wouldn't it be nice to bring flowers and delicious food to his room? Lydia nodded. And when he'll no longer be tired, we can have a small tea party and drink tea together. Yes. Lydia had various thoughts come to her mind, but upon seeing her daughter's twinkling eyes, her desire to oppose her disappeared. She asked seriously, Lily, do you really want to get along with the Crown Prince? I want to get along well, but I don't know what His Highness's feelings are. But yes, it is my wish to get along well with him. Then Lydia spoke. Well, then, all right. Mommy will also actively help you. Thank you. Lilika smiled brightly and hugged her mother. Lydia gave her an idea. Why don't we clean his room? Arrange a new flower with a vase. And stacked with delicious treats too. Wouldn't that be nice? Lilika spoke. From his long journey, we can hold a small tea party and have tea all together. Then, the little girl started to throw the paper away several times, because she was sending out invitations over and over again. She still couldn't write fluently, and she couldn't handle the pen tip well, so she had a lot of trouble smearing ink. Despite everything, she chose nothing but the best. She wrote, Dear Your Highness the Crown Prince. Hello, I am Your Highness's new cousin, Lilika Naratakar. Welcome home, Your Highness. I'd like for us to have a tea party in the garden. I'd be grateful if you would honor me with your presence. Goodbye. At night, the servant was surprised. Your Highness, we didn't expect you to arrive at this hour. At dawn, the Crown Prince's party struck the palace like a thunderbolt. Adel, who harshly opened the Black Dragon room's door, froze. The Crown Prince muttered, What's this? He opened the waiting room door and stopped immediately. The living room wasn't dark. Candles were lit here and there, thanks to Lilika's insistence that lights should be lit at night, and the fireplace was blazing, driving away the early morning chill. The decorations on the walls glistened, reflecting the light of the fireplace. It smells good too. They brought a lot of flowers. Since we're coming down from the north, I didn't even know it was spring. The beige-haired boy, Pi, who had followed him in, burst into admiration. Who did this? Wow, this is really cute. Pi lifted a teddy bear, clad in a butler uniform, from the living room's table and waved its arms. Welcome back, Your Highness. Judging from this letter, it seems that this is from your new cousin. Give it to me. Adel snatched the invitation from his hand. After reading it, he smiled coldly. Tell me you're going. Pi looked up expectantly. Bran, who followed, looked around. This is the first time we have been so welcomed. Would you like me to prepare a meal? Or would you like to wash up first? Both are done. Adol waved his hand. Will you accept the invitation? Pi asked again. Sure. Adol answered, throwing the invitation to Pi. Say you're going. Play house alone as much as you want. Standing in the scorching sun for 3 or 4 hours will make you feel better. Wow, the villain. Pi frowned. He didn't even know what kind of person the girl was, but right now, as an aide, it was very tempting for him to act like the prince's enemy. He knew why the crown prince was so edgy, but still. Before Pi could say anything, Adol waved his hand. I'm going to sleep now. Don't touch me until I wake up. As the prince went inside, Pi looked at the invitation and said, what the heck? Then, he sighed. Bran tilted his head. You must be hungry. Yeah, to the point of my belly skin sticking to me. But Bran, rather than that. Yes. Pi grinned and turned to Bran. He asked, pointing his finger at the decorations and welcome letters. Did you know about this? I told her that he might arrive around this time. That is food, he likes sweets. But that's all. It didn't get soggy, it's a well-made snack. Even Bran didn't know the exact date of their arrival. It was up to Adol. Nevertheless, the flowers were vivid and the snacks crispy. The teapot was still warm when he slightly touched it. They must have been changing the flowers, snacks, and tea from time to time. They had been very attentive. I wonder what that princess is thinking. No, it would be better to think this was the Empress's doing, and not the princess's. I'll need to collect some rumors, too. I left the imperial palace empty for too long. Because of that, he was not able to partake in an unprecedented event called His Majesty's wedding. Pi tasted all the sweets on the plate one by one. There was nothing poisonous, nothing strange in taste. He looked at the teddy bear and placed the invitation on the doll's leg. I'm sleepy too. He drove the horses all night long until dawn. It's not that he wasn't aware of Adol's paranoid anxiety, but he had hoped he would bear with it and not overwork his aides. I'm not as strong as a wolf. Pi grumbled before heading to his room. Lilika woke up at dawn. She scrambled out of bed. Has His Highness arrived? Is the tea still cold? Should I change the snacks? These days, she was paying attention to the Crown Prince's room, so the first thing that comes to her mind in the morning was worrying about the snacks. Lilika got out of bed and put on a dressing gown. Let's just go and check if the snacks or tea are cold. She had the maids do it, but it was necessary to confirm for herself as well. If the master didn't care, the subordinates won't either. Lilika put on her slippers and paused for a moment before opening the secret door. She didn't want to wake Bryn for nothing. Coming out through the hallways used by the servants, Lilika also went inside the Black Dragon room using the servants' door. When she opened the door slightly and entered the living room, Lilika froze. Because someone was sitting at the living room's table, eagerly eating snacks and tea. They met each other's eyes. Lilika immediately recognized who the other person was. Because she had asked Bryn several times what the Crown Prince was like. She couldn't believe she ran into His Highness dressed like that. No, screaming inwardly, Lilika lowered her head. She had to figure out an excuse somehow. Lilika said softly, I came here to see if His Highness needed more tea or sweets. She was a maid. She was a maid. Please. She hoped he didn't notice. Contrary to Lilika's desperate wish, Adol also recognized who she was at once. If it weren't for the imperial princess who walked around the palace in that outfit, he could have vomited all the snacks he had so far. Looking down at the bowed brown-haired head, Adol blocked the curses that were about to come out. Why is she coming out of there? He couldn't believe he showed her he was eating in a hurry the snacks she had prepared. He was hungry because he had traveled all night, and was only drawn to the thought that there was something to eat in the living room. The sweets he ate were great, and the tea was lukewarm, but not bad. After eating one, it was easy to eat the next cookie. Adol felt even worse because it seemed like he had been caught eating the table the enemy had prepared for him. Was she here to sneak a peek? He jumped up from his seat with a plate of cookies and walked over to Lilika. It was with the intention to pour snacks into her head and say something. Standing in front of her, he lifted the plate of cookies but stopped moving. Only then did he notice that Lilika was trembling and her ears were dyed bright red. And that she was much smaller than him. He bit his lip. Ha, really? Something that he didn't know whether it was a laugh or a sigh flowed out of his mouth. Seeing her flinch even at that small reaction made him less inclined to bully her. More than that, he wanted to see her face. How red could her face be when her ears were ever so scarlet? He also wondered why she came out of the servants' hallway and was wearing a dressing gown. He held out the plate to her. And spoke, "Eat." "Yes." "Oh no, I'm fine," she replied. His voice crept in. "Eat." He could see her fumbling and picking up a cookie before putting it in her mouth. But he still couldn't see her face. All he could see was her munching cheeks. Wow, His Highness the Crown Prince is tormenting a little girl. Surprised, Lilika turned her head, and there was a boy with soft beige hair standing there. "Don't bother me," Adol said sharply. Pai came over with a soft smile and held out a piece of paper. "Now, this is a reply to the invitation sent by the princess. His Highness the Crown Prince said he will attend." Leaping forward, Lilika received the reply. She lifted her head and looked at him, then lowered her head back in surprise. Pai chuckled and looked at Adol. Just for an instant, Adol saw Lilika's face, and the desire to be angry with her disappeared. It was a sparkling face, full of joy. He sighed and said, "Go now." "Yes, yes." Lilika hurried back into the secret hallway and closed the door. Pai suppressed his laughter, and Adol said sarcastically, "Why did you do that? Isn't it because she's a cute maid?" Adol replied, "But I don't think she is cute." In the morning, Lilika was nagged by Bryn. "Even if you have a secret meeting, you have to take your maid with you. Then it's not a secret meeting, is it?" Lilika, who had become accustomed to difficult words thanks to the dictionary, asked back. Bryn shook her head. "The princess must be accompanied by a maid even if she has a secret meeting. That's how important a maid is." "All right." Lilika nodded. Being a princess was more difficult than she thought. Actually, there was something she wanted to brag about to Bryn. "So," Lilika added, "the crown prince is coming to the tea party." "Oh, my goodness. Good for you, princess." "Yes. And he was eating a lot of snacks. My mother said that he only ate sweets brought by his aides. It seems he likes sweets very much." Bryn asked and imagined how the teenage boy had reacted when he was caught eating snacks that he said he didn't want. "Are you okay? You didn't get in trouble?" "Yes, I think he thought I was a maid." "Well, maybe." She added the last word quietly because she was not confidently. "But Bran said he would talk to him." "You met Bran?" "Yes, he looked like you, Bryn." I see. Of course, Bryn is more beautiful." "That's right." Bryn smiled softly. Although it was true that she resembled her brother, it was not a compliment. "Then we should prepare for the tea party." Lilika pondered those words over and over again. Tea party, tea party. The word had a sweet and enchanting ring to it. It was the first time she hosted one herself. Tension rose to her throat, but Bryn stood by and encouraged her. She had practiced several times so far, so it will work out well. It was an exercise to sit with a rabbit doll and bear doll, greet them gracefully, and offer tea to them. It was also the most enjoyable house play in the world. His Majesty told her to use the ice in the underground ice storage, so she even got a large chunk of ice. Lilika was shocked to find out that there was ice in this kind of weather, but she tried to show a calm face like a princess. Noble princesses wouldn't be surprised by ice. Late May. The garden was colorful with light green shoots and dark leaves. Early blooming roses were bursting with their bourgeons, adding color to them. The tufts on the large parasol glistened and swayed in the sunlight. Branches from the trees were bent and tied tightly with ribbons to cast shade. The wind blew moderately, and the spring breeze was gentle. Sunlight splattered through the branches and scattered on the ground like gold ornaments. It was the perfect weather and setting, just like plucked from an illustration. After all the preparations were completed, Lilika waited for the crown prince. Time went by slowly. When there was even a rustling sound, Lilika pricked up her ears and turned her gaze to it. It was quite late and Adel still did not appear. The faces of the waiting servants began to harden. Lilika whispered to Bryn, "Is he late because of work? I'm going to send a servant to find out." Bryn beckoned as she said that, and the servant, standing at the end of the gazebo, quickly departed. The servant who had returned after a while said with a grim expression, "He told me to tell you that he was still in the Black Dragon room and that he would be late." "Is that it?" To Bryn's question, the servant answered, "Yes." Bryn looked at Lilika, and the little girl replied, "There are no other options if he's late, I will wait." Lilika waited a long time. It was hard for her to stand still, and it became harder and harder since she was a child. She stood, shifting her center of gravity from side to side. Then, after 2 hours, the servant came back with a new answer and his head bowed. "He told me to tell you that he can't be with you today because he's too busy." Bryn's dark purple eyes shone coldly. She quickly examined her master's expression. Lilika looked surprised. Bryn had to say something, but Lilika spoke first. "Is he that busy?" Startled, the servant looked up and then bowed again. Yes, that's right. I see. Can you tell him not to be too sorry? I'm sure he's worried about making me wait. Tell him I'm fine and not to worry about it." The servant nodded earnestly at Lilika's words. Our story ends, my dear friends. Thanks for watching. Please comment and like our video. This will help us.